Now, before we begin cleaning up this controller, let's first take a few moments to review validation. So notice the store method here. This is the method we trigger when a user fills out the create form. And you'll notice at the moment, we don't care what they fill out. We immediately assign it to a property and then save it to the database. Now, frankly, this isn't something you should really ever do. As a general rule of thumb, always assume that user-provided data is malicious. So in real life, in our court system, we have the concept of innocent until proven guilty. In the programming world, reverse it. Users are guilty until proven innocent, okay? So take a look. We're going to validate this request. First, if nothing else, all three of these fields are in fact required. So let's set that. The excerpt is required, and of course the body is required. However, we can add as many of these as you want, and all you have to do is refer to the Laravel documentation. But for example, you could say either separated by a pipe, or you could provide an array, whatever you want. But you could do things like this. If you want the title to be a minimum of, for example, 3 characters, you could do that. Maybe for an input, if you want to set a max of 255. Another example might be for passwords and password confirmations. You want those 2 values to be the same. Any of those things can easily be handled with Laravel's validation component. Okay, but with that in mind, we're going to keep it fairly simple like this. So now let's see what happens. If I go back to our create form, you'll notice I haven't added any browser level validation. For example, typically you want to do things like this. This will give you an extra layer of front-end or browser validation. Now, be careful though, that doesn't mean you can skip the validation on the server side. You want to do both. This allows you to catch and alert the user as quickly as possible, but if they circumvent that in some way, your server-side logic will then catch it. Okay, but anyways, there is no browser validation at the moment. Let's give it a shot. Aha! So now notice, because I added that validation, the validation failed, and Laravel automatically redirected back to this page. So take a look at this. If I did not have this, what would happen? We submit the form, and of course it fails, but notice that this logic made its way all the way to the SQL end, so to the point of actually running the SQL query. But because we didn't provide anything, well, it's trying to insert null into those fields, and that's not allowed according to our table. So again, we never wanted to get that far. We'll stop it right here. Now, the way validation in Laravel works is if any validation fails here, it could be the title, could be the body, it could be all 3 here, Laravel will redirect back to the previous page and populate an errors variable, which is an object that you can then use to provide more information to the user. So for example, you'll notice if we run it right now, it did redirect back to the form. So again, notice I submit it, and it is performing a full post back and then redirecting here. But we don't provide any feedback to the user. So we can do that very easily in a number of ways. Let's start by adding a little helper message. So again, using this CSS framework, I believe I can do something like this. And we'll say errors first title. And we'll talk about this more in just a moment. But first, let's see it. So if we run it again, submit, sure enough, we do have some feedback now. But now here's something to be aware of. Notice if I refresh the page, at this point, we have no failed validation. We're starting from scratch, but we still don't have an error. And this is important to understand. Notice that by default, this errors variable, this object, is available everywhere. And that makes it a little easier when handling validation. You don't always have to check, well, do we have an errors variable? And if so, do we have an error for the title? It just simplifies things a little bit. However, we still do have one issue that I want to get rid of. So if I inspect this, you'll notice that even if I don't have an error for the title, we still render the paragraph tag. Now, ideally, I only want this paragraph tag if there is a variable. So let me show you 2 ways we could handle this. I could say if errors, does it have anything for the title? If so, then render this paragraph tag. So again, notice this errors object is provided by Laravel, and it offers lots of helpers to make most of the common actions you'll need as simple as possible. So now if I come back to Firefox and refresh, you'll notice if I inspect this, we no longer get that paragraph tag. It'll only show up if there's failed validation, as you see right there. Now we could even take this a little further and highlight the input itself. So for example, Again, using Bulma, I could add a class of isDanger. And again, you just get a little more feedback there. So let's do that as well. Errors has anything for the title? If so, add a class of isDanger. Otherwise, don't do anything. Okay, so now, if we submit it, that looks pretty good to me. Okay, but I did say there was another way to do this. Now, I could change this to the error directive, like so. And again, effectively the exact same thing. So if we can do that here, we could also do it with the ternary. And again, it just cleans things up a little bit. So I could rewrite this like so. If I have something for the title, add a class of isDanger, and then end error. All right, so take a look. We refresh, we submit the form, and we get the exact same thing. All right, so now let's finish up by doing the same thing down here. I'm going to copy this, bring it down below the text area, and then update it to the excerpt. Next, I'll do the exact same thing for the class name to add a red border. And then finally, we'll do it one more time for the body. And one last time. Okay, so one last time, if we submit the form, there we go. However, we're still not done. Let's imagine you provide a valid title, but you fail the validation for one of these. Well, now when I submit the form, it does redirect back. We don't see any errors here, but I also lost my title in the process. And that's a little annoying. So here's what we can do. If I scroll back up, first I'm going to begin by putting all of these attributes on their own line. Makes things a little easier on the eyes. Next, I can set the value equal to the old title that the user originally provided. So we can do it like so. And again, this old function is provided by Laravel. It just provides the previous input value. And do note as the second argument, if you need to, you could provide a default. Okay, so now we provide a valid title, we submit the form, it does redirect back, but this time we keep what you originally added there. All right, so try to remember to do that. And we'll do the same thing for the text area. And we'll add it here. All right, one last one. And we're all set to go. Okay, so now I'm going to switch back to my articles controller. We now have validation for the store method. However, what if we edit an existing article? For example, let's go back to our articles section. Here we go. Let's edit that. Okay, so what if we update this existing article? Well, think about it. That will then hit the update method, right? As soon as I click submit, that now hits the update method. But there's no validation there, so we're in that exact same boat where I could remove something entirely, and it will try to submit, and it will build up that SQL query that runs against the database. So we have to do the exact same thing here. So yet again, a little more duplication. We're going to begin talking about this in the next episode. But sure enough, at the moment, we need to repeat that validation. And now, it won't allow us to get to that point, as you'll see there. All right, so that's validation 101. In the next episode, I can now begin showing you some various techniques for cleaning up your controllers. Stay tuned.